Hi everybody. I recently sat down with Tyson Yunkaporta, who's just released a new book called Sand Talk: How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World, and it's made quite a big splash. Tyson's from the Apalech Clan in northern Queensland in Australia, and he's also a senior lecturer in Indigenous Knowledges at Deakin University in Melbourne. So what's special about the book is that Tyson is taking an Indigenous perspective and using that to look back at Western culture, and he's really looking at a lot of the topics like systems change and complexity that we've been exploring on Rebel Wisdom.
Anybody who thinks they've got a solution or they have a plan or a design or anything like that, they're an idiot. You can't. Dynamic systems don't operate like that. You know, you have a thing called emergence. We know this, we know the science on it, and, you know, emergence is the only thing that can deal with these kind of complexities. So all you can do is foster the conditions for emergence.
Tyson also brings a really unique perspective on a lot of the cultural dynamics that we've explored on the channel. So everything from the culture wars through to economics.
In any theory, if you're just focusing on a few little snippets that fit with your personal brand, and you're barking those things at everyone else like an idiot, then, then you're going to be an idiot. And I really can't see where it's coming from, this idea that that is just a trait of the left or the social justice warriors or anyone, because I'm seeing everybody doing that. I'm seeing people who are claiming centrism especially doing that. But everybody's critiquing everybody else in very shallow ways.
And he also doesn't hold his punches when he's talking about where our current systems and trajectory in the West is leading us.
You know, where you used to have family and community, now you're going to have the economy and government, the economy and the state, and we're going to provide all the things for you that land used to provide, but you have to sell us a third of your life. The trade-off is you have to give us a third of your life. Like, you're going to have to spend another third sleeping. Oh, and by the way, a sizable chunk of the third that's left over, you're going to have to spend commuting, life maintenance tasks, paying your bills, make sure you account it. And you're not going to be getting any exercise anymore, bro, so you need to set aside an hour for that. Yeah, that's all right. We're going to provide you with these little shitty indoor spaces where you can lift heavy things that don't need lifting, and pedal on a bike that goes nowhere, and run even though nothing's chasing you and you're not chasing anything and you're not in a hurry. You're going to do all those pointless tasks, and you're going to do them over and over and over until you fucking die, and that's progress. Oh, God.
So Tyson Yunkaporta, thanks a lot for being here.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Yeah.
So Tyson, your book Sand Talk is creating quite a splash at the moment, and generating a lot of interest. It'd be really great to hear just a little bit about, like, what's the key message or some of the key messages in the book.
Yeah, well, it's basically a reversal. Usually when people look at Indigenous knowledge, it's examining, you know, the content of Indigenous knowledge, you know, and snippets of it from a non-Indigenous perspective. Or it's always, even if it's an Indigenous voice, it's about trying to explain our knowledge to the rest of the world. But Sand Talk doesn't do that. It kind of flips things around. So Sand Talk is looking at the world from an Indigenous perspective. So it's taking that Indigenous knowledge standpoint and using that as a lens to have a look at what's going on in the world. Yeah, so it's kind of turning it back. It's like reverse anthropology, really. And it's a really cheeky book. It's not done in like an aggressive way or a blamey way, or like going, you're like this privilege, that privilege, whatever. It's kind of just fun, you know. We kind of do some thought experiments, have a few laughs, tell some yarns, and then there's a few slaps in there just for fun too. But yeah, people enjoy it, it seems. And it looks like, I mean, it really strongly invites the reader to bring their stories alongside and their knowledge alongside and amongst all of that knowledge. And so in that way, it's designed to be a book that no two people would read the same book. Everybody's reading a different book when they come there because they're bringing their standpoint to that and finding a safe space to just experiment with that. Experiment with these different viewpoints, worldviews, life worlds coming together. So it's a bit of fun.
Nice. And what made you decide to write it? I know you have a really, really interesting background, which we might go into in a bit, but like why now? Like why now?
I needed the money and they offered me a $5,000 advance. That's why. And it was work I was doing anyway, but I was just doing it verbally. I had messages that have been, I've been given these tasks to do by elders where you need to pass on this message out to as many people as you can. You need to get these symbols, particularly from Old Man Juma in the book, but several other elders as well, and lots of other people. So I just basically been going around and yarning with people for 20 years, getting those messages out there. And I couldn't think of anything else to write about, so I wrote about that. And I thought it would be a labor-saving device, like it would save me from having too many more yarns because they're exhausting. But no, it's just exponentially increased the amount of conversations that I have to have. And, and straining all of my relationships in doing so. I'm on borrowed time. I'm using up all my relational credit here in this house.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you're making the time.
There's people out there like vacuuming and trying to feed people and bathe people right now. Not happy with me not being there doing that. You're off having your yarns, are you? That's great. Who's gonna watch this fridge? Yeah.
Brilliant. So, yeah, I mean, on the subject of yarns, you just described really nicely the way in which Sand Talk, and I suppose that the worldview you're exploring is based on many different stories coming together. And of course, like the land has stories as well, and is speaking and teaching us. So there's all this kind of interconnection of stories and yarns. The telling of stories is a huge part of Sand Talk. Now, in a way, it's a kind of very, you could see it as a very postmodern thing, this kind of weaving together of many different perspectives. And we've spoken a little bit before, and I was really interested in your take on postmodernism. You have a kind of unique perspective because you have this perspective of understanding that these kind of multiple viewpoints exist, but you're also holding quite, I think, a nuanced position. And we've talked a lot on the channel and looked a lot from the very beginning of Rebel Wisdom on like looking at the culture wars and looking at this kind of tension between, one side of the culture where there's the entities like the IDW and the others, which is, described as kind of woke or social justice, and this big tension between them that's happening. I think, when we've talked, you have an interesting synthesis around these things. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about maybe beginning with where you think postmodernism has gone too far and then going into where you think it's really offered a valuable perspective. But maybe we could start where you think it has gone too far in the culture and where it's not helpful.
Yeah. The language of going too far is like, I don't know, it always makes me feel like, oh, daddy will smack, and I do hear that phrase a lot. And it's often, not with you, but it's often followed by just a remarkable process of critiquing critical theory, postmodernism, post-structuralism, deconstructivism, all these things. It sort of delivers a bit of a blistering critique of those things using the tools of critique that are so I see all these downtrodden, powerful cultural groups sort of rising up to use the victim's tools to deconstruct the victim's house. So I don't quite get it. Look, so you've got critical theory, critical race theory. All of these things are theories. And what is a theory? A theory is wrong for a start. Like that's the limit. And any scientist will tell you the same. Every theory is wrong, but it can be useful in certain contexts. You know, Newton's physics, it helps. It's helping that the vacuuming that's happening out there right now, that you can probably hear that vacuum cleaner. You know, Newton's physics works in certain contexts. But in order for this Zoom meeting to take place, we probably don't want to go with Newton. We probably want to go with Einstein. Otherwise, the signal won't work because, you know, time changes for this when the signal bounces up to the satellite. The further you go from the Earth, time changes. So you're going to need Einstein for a bit. But then he's only good up to a point. You need to switch between theories. And I guess if you're living in complexity and dealing with complex problems in a complex world, then you need to borrow from lots of theories simultaneously. So, I mean, basically, you know, if you read my book, and a lot of very conservative people who read my book and really loved it, and I don't think they realize that what I'm doing there is standpoint theory, and it's grounded in a lot of deconstructivism, simply because these are the things that have allowed me the tools to come into the space. You know, I have problems with postmodernism, but it's mostly from an indigenous perspective. Postmodernism is placeless. You know, it's ethereal. It's floating in space. It doesn't, you know, all indigenous knowledge is grounded strongly in place, and it's very spatial. You know, it always is. So postmodernism is not a good tool for that. However, postmodernism, deconstructivism, and particularly post-colonialism has been a very good tool for us to be able to enter the academy and to assert our standpoint, and to make sure that we're able to think and inquire from our standpoint, which is a very difficult thing to explain. And this has given rise to lots of really good things. I don't know if you've ever heard of Misty Jenkins, but Misty Jenkins is an Aboriginal woman from Australia, from Gunditjmara mob. And she's one of the top genetic researchers on the planet. At the moment, she's got a lab where she's pretty much sorting out brain cancer. but she's come up with one of the very big discoveries that completely revolutionized genetic science. And it was her, you know, grounding in her indigenous standpoint, making room for her to be able to apply our patterns of logic to what she was studying, and to bring in other variables that are usually aren't there, like time and place and season and things like that, to be able to bring those things in. That's what's allowed her to make those discoveries. So you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, most of the post-colonial and decolonizing methodologies we have in the Indigenous Academy, you know, we have to acknowledge post-structuralist feminism for their legacy. You know, you don't have to be a post-structuralist feminist to use those tools. You know, we pick those things up, and there's a lot of problematic stuff in there. You know, and a lot of you know, women of color around the world, you know, have, you know, done the hard work of actually critiquing the stuff that's in there and trying to find more creative ways to do the work. But I guess in any theory, if you're just focusing on a few little snippets that fit with your personal brand, and you're barking those things at everyone else like an idiot, then then you're going to be an idiot. And I really can't see where it's coming from, this idea that that is just a trait of the left or the social justice warriors or anyone, because I'm seeing everybody doing that. I'm seeing people who are claiming centrism especially doing that. But everybody's critiquing everybody else in very shallow ways. And when they're looking at the bell curve, it's great to include the outliers in your analysis because they're part of the story too. But if you just focus on the outliers, the tails of the distribution, then your analysis is not going to be accurate. So if you're only looking at YouTube videos of SJWs when they're angry and you're going, oh, that's what postmodernism is, then it's not going to work. It's not going to be valid. Where's the validity? Where's the rigor that you are claiming. Because all these people are always claiming this, "Oh, I'm being objective and empirical. The data doesn't lie. So I'm going to quote one statistic out of context and make it look like all males of color are rapists." And well, you can't argue with the statistics. I'm just being rational. It's like, they're in a context, bros, and your analysis is rubbish. It's absolute rubbish. It's not empirical. You're not the positivist voice of reason and empiricism and truth. You're just an idiot who can't see his own standpoint. And you have one. You have a standpoint that is shaping the knowledge you're presenting and the analysis you're doing. It's just that you can't see it. It's invisible to you. So, as I said before, it's Foucault ain't woke. You can't brand the entire body of knowledge that's developed over decades. You can't brand that under that one SJW that you saw on YouTube, because Foucault's got his act together, and the libertarian right deploys his critique of neoliberalism, very well. They never cite him, though. You don't see them saying, "Oh yeah, this is from Bourdieu." But that came after 9/11. With the freedom fries, there was an enormous backlash in the culture wars against anything French, and unfortunately, deconstructivism, critique, postmodernism, all these things came under fire. And I don't know if you saw this in the States, but in Australia, it was just a newspaper campaign that basically upended the entire school curriculum in Australia, and removed anything that smacked of that evil French postmodernism. Because it's freedom fries, and you're going back to the reading, writing, and arithmetic, because that's empirical, and that's common sense,
That's awesome. I mean, I find Foucault really still very useful, and in particular, looking at how institutions exercise power, and that's a critique everyone's using. Most people are using that critique, as you say.
Yeah.
You go into that. You go into the way in which our institutions, but maybe more broadly our entire systems, are effectively taking us towards a kind of a zero-sum point. In Santalk, be interesting to hear a little bit about what does that Indigenous perspective show us that we might not see from within our current systems, in whatever you want to call it, Western capitalism, or maybe it's probably better terms for it.
I think the most important gift is just reclaiming the adaptive capacity of our species. It is our unique gift, as the custodial species of this planet. It's our unique gift to be able to adapt to massive changes and massive traumas. And acceptance is just, it's part of our human knowledge systems. Any knowledge system that is still human and not domesticated, acceptance is part of that, kind of in the tradition of the Greek Stoics and all that kind of thing, I think that's some of the unique gifts that knowledge can bring out. But all that knowledge is really just human knowledge. The knowledge of undomesticated humans, how we actually are, our nature. So inherently, human beings are opposed at the genetic level to any kind of hierarchies, permanent hierarchies, and permanent power imbalances, monopolies, things like this. For well over 1 million years, we've been living in societies that are, that do not respond to that very well. And most of our societies are set up to prevent that from happening. There's this last 10,000 year blip of a bit of an experiment, and particularly the last few centuries where, that's taken over a bit, but that won't last much longer.
In the book, you talk about the way in which Aboriginal culture is sort of geared up to make sure that narcissism doesn't take over. and it's a huge part of it. We were just talking about the culture wars and this sense of everyone thinking that they're right, and everyone doubling down on reason or doubling down on deconstruction or whatever it might be. It strikes me that there's rampant narcissism in our culture, and it goes much deeper than just a particular spat on Twitter. It goes right down to the core of it. So what Aboriginal culture, in what ways can it help us get a new lens on that, on our own narcissism, let's say?
I think it's about just getting back to natural law. Like I was saying, there is that inherent sort of abhorrence of the idea of anybody, getting one over anyone else or dominating. The idea of one story or one point of view coming out on top and being the one story to rule them all is absolute anathema to us all at the molecular level. We cannot accept that, as human beings. We all hate that, but we're kind of trapped in it at the moment, and it's just, there's such weird fractal things going on. So even you mentioned before, doubling down, that's a critique, an attempted critique to try and expose the pattern of communication that's going on at the moment. But as soon as we put that out there, everybody picked it up, and that just became another layer to the purity testing going on. So everybody's accusing everybody else of doubling down whenever they say anything. It's it's just fractal misery that's going on. Misery stacked misery in all communication at the moment. And it's lawless behavior, because all we have is paper law, digital law, whatever that is ephemeral, coming from institutions that we don't trust anymore. So I think you see, every time there's a disaster, people fall back on natural law. Like we always see where there's a disaster basically, you could define it as any situation that knocks the control of the state and the mechanisms of the state out of operation for a while. That's what a disaster is. And into that gap floods all this natural law from the human beings and the landscape that they inhabit. Suddenly we just get back into it. And you always hear about it after the disasters. There's always feel-good news reports about, how everybody came together cooperatively and collaborated and lifted themselves out. And you see people interviewed, and they're not miserable or scared or upset about the disaster. They're kind of really excited on a bit of a high about the marketplace that emerged, the sharing economy that emerged, in which everybody was supporting each other, and everybody suddenly found that they were all quite prosperous and all had everything that they needed, just through that free-flowing exchange with no monopolies and no controls. Then the state comes back in and gets control. You see it in when there's a coup or something. You see it in Sudan and places like that, Somalia, or all around the world. You see these temporary disruptions to all these institutions that we just don't trust anymore. You see that emergence of natural law, and so that's what people need to get back to. But if anybody gives, I hesitate even to call it natural law, because that's a label, and then people will be purity testing on that. Just whatever you do, don't give it a name. All you can do is foster the conditions for emergence and allow it to emerge, and just behave with integrity, and maybe others will do the same. But the minute you have an idea and you think, this is an important idea, everybody should know about this, everybody should be doing this, as soon as you do that, you've made an ideology and you're stuffed. You've made a closed system, and entropy is the only thing that can ensue.
Yeah. So I'm curious about how this applies, or how this could apply, because I suppose a critic might say, yeah, but we've got all these supply chains. Like, how are we going to, without those institutions, How are we going to feed everyone? All of that. So what are some of the ways that we might rethink it rather than just going, no, but we need the state, we need those laws, etc. Like, yeah, because some people
Well,
will be like,
I mean,
anarchy.
we're already starting to go, how are we going to feed everybody for the next decade?
Hmm.
The supply chains have been so catastrophically disrupted, and they're so complicated that nobody understands how they work. So we can't just tinker them back together again. What's going to happen? So we're already there, you know. How will we make it work? Well, you know, I guess your freed slaves in the United States had that same conundrum. So remember, they were promised 40 acres and a mule. You remember that? Where did that go? Forget about reparations. Just give everybody the equivalent of 40 acres and a mule. That'd be good. How much does that cost now? That's worth a bit. You start that off. But they didn't get the 40 acres and a mule. They were just dumped. And so they had to, like, just with the clothes on their back and the work of their hands, they had to try and build communities. Now, the economic systems that they created in their communities, they were a very different economic system. You know, they were collaborative, collective, and you know, these really dynamic sharing economies where every unit of value, every hard-won unit of value had a lot of velocity within that system. So although there wasn't very much wealth there, there was amazing prosperity. So you ended up with Black Wall Street, you know, Tulsa, all these places. And, you know, it wasn't racism that caused the massacres and riots that followed. You know, it was basically an intolerable collective sharing economy, a different economic system emerging that was absolutely unacceptable to the juggernaut of that free market economy that was, well, not that it's a free market, with the monopolistic economy that was being created. You know, so you had adjacent white communities that were far more wealthy but far less prosperous than the poor black neighborhoods coming out. So they had to be destroyed. You know, so I guess, I don't know, you'll find the answer in there.
Yeah, it's really striking, you know, as you're talking, I'm thinking that this is one of the perhaps key arguments of I don't know quite what to describe it, because as you mentioned, giving it a name, but let's say, I've called it kind of wokeism, or like the kind of the genesis of post-structuralism, which is that certain ways of knowing basically oppress other ways of knowing, which I think there's a lot of validity to that. You know, what you're just describing, what happened in Tulsa, for example, of like a different way emerging, and then the dominant culture, what I think Renee Eisler called the dominator society, and kind of coming in and suppressing it. You know, that is, I think, a valid aspect of it. But then there's always that balancing point, it seems, between also honoring the perspective of, say, rationality and finding some way to blend them together. I mean, do you think that's doable? Is that like, what's your take on synthesis?
What is it that's indicating to you that rationality is no longer the dominant worldview?
I think it is. I think it
is still the dominant worldview.
Yeah, sure.
You know, we don't need to, like, you know, silence all these people who are going too far to try and make some room for the dominant ideology on the planet. It's everywhere. It's the structure of everything from Uber to anything else. You know, it's already there. Like, relax. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's still the dominant way of thinking on the planet, and you have to conform to it. And, you know, you can complain to the Chinese as much as you like, but they still have to learn English in order to do business in this world. And they still have to go by the calendar of the Anglosphere. Everybody's got to go with the same calendar that starts with Jesus's birthday. You know, you know, yeah. Everybody still has to exist in the same institutions that are based on that, you know, that sort of positivist framework. You know, and there are some things that have made some room to try and see a few different points of view and to use a few other tools that will actually help. Like I said before, even with your genetics research and everything else. But yeah, I mean, I think people look at sort of the volume of the minority that are, screaming wokeisms, and they kind of equate that, the quality of the volume, to the quantity of, how far it's spread. It's certainly not the dominant ideology on the planet. Although, a lot of people just, I mean, here's the thing, Amazon might put up a Black Lives Matter sticker and make a statement, but it's not changing their operations. They don't have to change anything structurally. All they have to do is say the thing. And so everybody goes, oh, look, they're taking over or whatever. Nothing's changed. The structure's still there. The prison industrial complex is still a thing.
Yeah.
And that's not going anywhere, and that requires inequality. So postmodernism, critical race theory, all these things, they're really just trying to bring an awareness of power to the table, because power is a variable in all of these things that you want to study. And if you ignore that variable, a really key variable, then your findings are invalid. Your data is invalid. Your analysis is invalid. You do need to, at least, you need to factor in power as a variable, because it just is. Yeah. It exists, and it's great that your opinion might be that power doesn't exist. Like, oh, what are all these people complaining about? That's great if that's your opinion, but that's not rational. If you're claiming a rational viewpoint and you're ignoring power, that's not rational, Braz. Yeah.
And I think for me that the critique and the understanding of the way power moves and the way it works and the way it plays out in society is the most valuable aspect of postmodernism, and is why I think Foucault is so important. At the same time, I would love to get your thoughts.
Boring though.
Yeah. But
that's how I use Foucault, is to help me fall asleep at night. It's so dense. I get 2 pages in. And,
that kind of French philosophy in general, or kind of French critical theory is, it is hard. It's quite dense. But so I just wanted to kind of look at one example in particular. I'm with you on the fact that we have to look at power and we have to consider that. But again, where does it start to become its own power game is my question, right? So for example, there was this, I don't know if you saw it, a big spat on Twitter about the statement 2 + 2 = 5. And it was made as a sort of pithy remark by, I think, James Lindsay, who's a very contentious character. And I also question his approach and worldview in various ways. But he posted that, and then other people took it up as 2 + 2 = 4 is basically white supremacy, because it's one kind of rational way of knowing, coming in and determining everything else. And then other people were arguing, well, hang on, it's also somewhat a universal through cultures, and other people said, no, it's not. What would be your take on it? Because some people would look at that and go, it's important to be aware of power, but even with maths, is that valid? What do you reckon?
Well, here's the thing. In Indigenous knowledge, it's a lot of people think it's static and just remains the same for thousands of years, but it doesn't. We're always taking on new knowledge, but we do it rigorously. Things are tested very rigorously before they're incorporated. And basically the inquiry, the method of inquiry that we have, is about drilling down to the foundational story of the thing that we're looking at. So, as soon as you're saying that, I'm thinking through trying to get down to what's the foundational story here. And it's seldom what people are talking about. People are seldom angry for the reason they think, and they are never angry for the reason they say. So, you drill down to the story, and there's lots of stories there, but the foundational story on that silly little debate, because it is silly, it's obviously, it's you might call it a bad faith conversation, But I guess, the foundational story is, well, where did those numerals come from in the first place? No one's saying like, I plus I equals IV, are they? They're going 1 plus 1. Where did they come from? They're Arabic numerals, and that's the project of Westernism, is to just go around the world and plunder all kinds of stuff and to remove it from its context and build, this canon of knowledge that'll be the center of all things. So I would say that's that's part of the foundational story there. So you'd start your way up. I'd probably want to ask an Arab mathematician what he thinks about that, because they have lots of, I don't know, they have lots of ideas about, 5 is unlucky and all that sort of thing. So they probably wouldn't want 2 plus 2 to equal 5. I don't know. That would be a fun little experiment. Look, I recommended to my university, like they have a diversity kind of, every university has this. They have a diversity program where they do all kinds of things. And I went, look, it's lovely that you've got like a poster of a girl in a hijab there. That's nice, but that's not diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion would be like, if you were targeting that segment, if you really wanted to like equally value that culture's knowledge, then you'd say, right, every research project with more than $1 million funding has to allow this team of Arab scientists to have a second run at their data. So once you've analyzed your data and you got your findings, you then have to submit it to this Arab speaking committee who, in Arabic, speaking their own language, will go through and analyze your data and see if they come up with the same findings. And that will be a test for rigor. I mean, if you really did value that culture and their knowledge and their facility with these numerals, which has a far longer tradition than yours, then give them another go at your data and see if they can replicate your results. If they can't, have another look at it, bros. They didn't like that idea. That would be actual diversity, and that would be productive diversity. They don't. They just want the pretty girl in the hijab on the poster. They might put her on the board of something, or they might make her a vice chancellor or something like that, and everyone will feel good for about 5 minutes. But you can't. People trying to rescue this system, but then you got the SJWs on the other side. They're trying to change the system. They think that they can make this civilization fair. You can't. So as I said before, it's like trying to make your dog into a vegan. He's one or two things is going to happen. He's going to die or he's going to eat you. This civilization, this system, this economic system, it's a dog, and he don't want to be a vegan. Can't be vegan.
So, so would your suggestion be that we let the dog die, and that we see what happens after that, or we're in this situation whether we like it or not, whoever we are, wherever we are. So,
I don't think there aren't any solutions, and I don't know anybody who thinks they've got a solution or they have a plan or a design or anything like that. They're an idiot. You can't. Dynamic systems don't operate like that. You have a thing called emergence. We know this. We know the science on it, and emergence is the only thing that can deal with these kind of complexities. So all you can do is foster the conditions for emergence. If I was going to go straight from my own like psychotic ideology, I would just be like, yeah, shoot the dog. Just shoot it. Shoot it. Get a goat if you wanted to eat veggies. Jesus. That's where I'd go to. But that would just be narcissism, my narcissism talking. I can't have a solution. Nobody can. That's insane. There would just be another stupid, complicated, tinkered, bloody teetering, horrible, corruptible system that would come out from that. Yeah. I think we're just going to have to go through all this. And, if you're unfortunate enough to have stepped into the Twitter sphere and started wrestling the pigs, then well, I'm sorry, but you're you're in, you done wrestled a pig, and now you're covered in the same muck. Yeah, and that's just something you're just gonna have to go through. Yeah, see what you pick up when you're in there. But
Yeah,
things
and
will emerge.
it's so interesting. What you're saying comes right back to something we were talking about before, which, this narcissism, this idea that we can control, that this idea that the world is there for us to control, rather than, a lot of cultures, a lot of kind of cultures from ancient, pre-Socratic, in the West as well as around the world, had a sense that we need to look after the sacred. We are stewards of the sacred. This sacred isn't just there to look after us. We look after it. And then there's this similar, I can think, kind of attitude towards the world. It's like, kind of, what can this system give me, as opposed to surrendering and allowing it to emerge. That is so opposite to what Western culture is set up to do, and the value systems that we live by. So I'm just curious about what are some of the axioms, is a terrible word for it, but what are some of the values that Aboriginal culture would use to go, hey, chill out, and be in that flow rather than trying to control it?
The terrible answer to that is that there are none, because they're not needed. So Aboriginal culture at its foundation, it never separated society from nature, so it didn't have to separate all those abstracts and name those things and then come up with rules to put that. The law is natural law, and the law is in the land, and it's all around you, and you have to follow that. And those laws are inalienable. You can't change it, like a Bill of Rights or a charter, or what you's in America always talking about, that, what's that document the founding fathers won? I don't know why I can't remember it now. It starts with C. Constitution. That's right. Apparently there's one for Australia too, but I mean, that's just a funny little temporary tweakable thing. It'll disappear along with the paper it's written on. But there is permanent inalienable law, and it is in the land. It's in your DNA. It's in every natural impulse that you have. And I guess the pathological impulses that people have, in response to a really sick environment, a sick habitat, a sick system, that's not them. A lot of people think that's our nature, is that, we just run around, we're just raping. Like, that's what, if we remove this rule of law or anything else, it's just rape and murder until we're all dead. But that's not what happened for the last million years. And it's been a million years of symbolic reasoning and meaning making, at least, because that's the oldest example of symbolic reasoning found, at the carved shells, the beautiful carved shells from the Homo erectus in Asia. Homo erectus was making meaning, and that's a million years old, at least. Who knows how far back before that? We do have a lot of thought and a lot of ways of being behind us. And this last 5 minutes is a blip. And the ways we're behaving now, these knee-jerk responses and programmed responses, these aren't our natures. It's not what's natural.
Rebel Wisdom was set up to make sense of the world at a deeper level than the mainstream media. It was built for these times of crisis and change, which is why we want to do what we can to meet the challenge of the times. More films, and also for our Rebel Wisdom members, weekly sense-making calls with our amazing interviewees. And also, we're introducing the Wisdom Gym, a place to practice some of the skills that we've talked about on the channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.